dying of laughter.
It's not funny.
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too.
Hello, happy Friday or sad Friday. If you're feeling sad, that's also relatable. So whether happy Friday resonates or sad Friday resonates, shut up. If you're new here, I'm Chelsea. I talk about death, dying, and diagnosis, but typically in a lighter way. I'm very interested in the intersection of comedy and death, and also the entertainment industry and where that meets the healthcare industry. That is my passion, based on my experience losing my dad to ALS, who was suffering from when I was 4 till when he died when I was in college. And also based on the experience of my mother being diagnosed with breast cancer in elementary school and who now is combating stage 4 metastatic breast cancer today. High, low of the week. You didn't ask, but I felt like that was something to do. That was like a little game we could play. Hi, I shot a little project from my mom's bathroom that I'm excited to when it comes out. I think it'll be funny. It was just so weird being all by myself, shooting anything. I'm being vague. I hate when people are vague. If you can't tell me what it is, just shut up. So I'm going to tell myself to shut up, but I will share it when it comes out. And if it's funny, let's be honest, even if it's not funny, I'll still share it because I'm a sharer. But it was an interesting experience to set up the cameras, do the hair and makeup, be the craft services person. By that, I mean I just got mad at myself when coffee didn't appear. Had to fire a few people. They were all me. And that was still my high somehow. Low, I was just pondering how long I was going to be here. I'm quarantined at my mom's in the Bay Area. Normally I live in LA. And it's really lovely in so many ways to be here, but I just was having some thoughts like, wow, I wonder how long I will be here and what that means for life. I think it's normal to feel a little concerned or confused about your life when you're in a new area and don't know how long you will be there. So that was just something I was thinking about. Anyways, let's get to the episode. I am thrilled to have Patrick James Lynch here. I think you'll be really, really fascinated with this episode. Patrick is an award-winning filmmaker, media professional, and health advocate. He's delivered more than 100 presentations across the globe about hemophilia. He lost his brother to hemophilia when his brother was 18 and he was 21. And if you don't know what hemophilia is, it is a medical condition in which the ability of the blood to clot is severely reduced, causing the person to bleed severely from even a slight injury. Patrick does a much better job explaining it than I do. Patrick has also been recognized with the Hemophilia Federation of America's Health and Wellness Award, the National Hemophilia Is Foundation Meritorious Service Award. He was a featured speaker during the World Federation of Hemophilia's World Conference, has served as a founding board president of the 501c3 Entertainment to Effect Change since 2013, and has been the CEO of Believe Limited since 2012. His work has been featured by media outlets such as Backstage, BuzzFeed. Woo, BuzzFeed. I work for BuzzFeed. What's up? This is not about me. Shut up, self. Forbes, Fox News, HemAware, Hemophilia News Today, HuffPo, PBS, and Voyage LA. Wow. His film credits include documentaries Bombardier Blood, My Beautiful Sutter, and the scripted films Elsewhere and Sometimes I Think About Dying, which he was the EP of, that premiered at Sundance 2019 and made the Oscars 2020 shortlist. Among other things, I mean, let's keep going. Other notable digital content includes the comedy web series Stop the Bleeding, now in its 10th season, and he is the creator, host, and founder of BloodStream Media and Hemophilia the Musical. What's even happening? Go to patrickjameslynch.com and just learn about this powerhouse. I'm honored to speak with him. His wife is also pregnant and he's just like busy changing the world. Specifically, I want to highlight Patrick's new documentary, Bombardier Blood. Bombardier Blood follows mountaineer Chris Bombardier, who is on a mission to become the first person with severe hemophilia to climb the 7 summits, which are the highest mountains on each continent. He's completed 5 of the climbs already, but he must face the next big one, Everest. So I can't wait to see it. It comes out August 18th. You can pre-order Bombardier Blood right now on iTunes. I will also drop the link in the description of this episode and post about it in the coming weeks on my Instagram account, Dying of Laughter Podcast. Shout out to my hilarious friend, comedian Avra Friedman, for connecting us. You rock, Avra. She's cool. Patrick's cool. If you're listening, you're cool. Let's do this. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being here. I know you're super busy running a company. You have an exciting doc coming out and are pregnant. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, can you tell listeners a little bit about what you do in the world of hemophilia?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name is Patrick James Lynch. I'm a filmmaker and content producer. My company, Believe Limited, is a content agency and film production company. And I'm also a hemophilia and bleeding disorders advocate, and I do a lot of my work in the bleeding disorders world. So I'm sure we'll get into that more as we go. But at the moment, it's the documentary that I've been working on that is kind of a great merge of my entertainment world and content world and hemophilia advocacy world. And it's really just kind of the nexus of everything that I do. And right now it's coming out into the world, which is amazing and scary and a bunch of other things.
I love what you're saying. It's amazing, scary, and a bunch of other things. And before we share more about the doc, for anyone who doesn't know what hemophilia is, it's a rare bleeding disorder, but you can put it into better words than I can. Do you mind sharing for the zillionth time, I'm sure, in your life, what is hemophilia?
It's part of it. You just got to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, without getting too heady about it, all of us are born with proteins whose job it is to help clot when blood vessels burst. So veins, arteries, capillaries, this happens all the time, and our body's just usually taking care of it, unless something significant happens and you get a bruise or, you rupture some major stuff. But if you have hemophilia, you're missing one of 2 clotting proteins that's crucial for that process. And it's kind of like a domino effect. Those 2, if one's missing, the whole thing kind of falls apart. It's really actually fascinating. The bleeding and clotting cascade of the body is such an intricate machine, but and I actually just recently learned this. It hasn't changed. In this world-renowned hematologist was making the point that this system, as odd and crazy as it is and weird, this bleeding and clotting system, it hasn't changed in a very long time, and anytime we kind of mess with it, it seems to fall apart. So it's real fragile. So if you're missing one of these proteins, it really screws the whole thing up. So there is great medication available. In the last couple of years, there's actually been an explosion of scientific breakthroughs. Hemophilia is in the news a bit these days because there's gene therapy that is being worked on for hemophilia that's really close to being something that's commercially available, which is exciting and crazy to think about. So yeah, that's what it is in a nutshell. You're missing a clotting protein, and you have to take medicine to keep yourself going.
And about 1 out of every 400,000 people have hemophilia. Is that correct?
The 400,000 people in the world have it is kind of the number that gets used often. It occurs in about 1 in 5,000 male births, but I kind of prefer saying it occurs in 1 in every 10,000 births, because though it's rare that it presents in women in a moderate or severe fashion, I think in the U.S., moderate and severe hemophilia is presented in like less than 200 diagnosed women. Doesn't mean that more don't have it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like 1 in 5,000 male births or 1 in 10,000 births overall.
And to clarify, you have hemophilia, and we are here today also honoring your brother who died of hemophilia. Do you care to speak more about what that was like growing up with hemophilia? And I know it's a sensitive topic, so I appreciate you sharing.
No, I know. That's why we're here. I mean, imagine if I was like, no, see ya. It would be very odd. Why did I come here? And I guess I didn't clarify this. Yeah, so I have hemophilia. I have severe hemophilia, and I'm 34. And it's interesting because my the documentary, and I promise I'm going to get to the question that you just asked, but my buddy who is the mountain climber, he and I are the same age, so we both turned 35 this year. And we're kind of in the year 1985, our birth year, is considered like the turning point in hemophilia care in the U.S. Because in the period of the 70s and the 80s, there was a blood contamination crisis that led to blood products for people with hemophilia being riddled with HIV and hepatitis. So 90% of people contracted it. 90% of people with hemophilia contracted HIV and or Hep C as a result. But in 1985, they started heat treating this medication, and the heat treated process that it went through was able to neutralize these pathogens, and the medicine became effective and free of these terrible, terrible viruses. And so Chris and I were both born. I actually cleared a hepatitis C virus at some point in my life. So I'm really cuspy in that way. So it's interesting to think about life with hemophilia now as opposed to when I was born, just before I was born, and then around the world as the documentary gets into. And yeah, my brother passed away from it because while we have made incredible progress on the medications that are available, I mean, the hemophilia story is a rare disease story that other people affected by rare disease really should look into, because there's a lot of sadness, but rare disease comes with sadness. And there is so much hope and progress and community building and advocacy, and just incredible things have been accomplished. So it is certainly a tough story, but it's a story that should give people hope. But all of that is to say, hemophilia is a life-threatening chronic disease, untreated. And my brother's death was as a result of a head bleed, which is kind of the big fear, that all parents have for their children with hemophilia, is they'll get a bleed in their head that they won't be able to control, as they say, and that will be what kills them. And unfortunately, that was the case. That was the case for my brother.
Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you are such an incredibly inspiring person, and that you have taken the tragedy that you've experienced and turned it into this educational powerhouse of tools for other families and people with hemophilia.
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Please.
Educational powerhouse of tools. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So,
thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah, of course. So your brother was 18 and you were 21.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that your experience at that time has... So do you mind sharing, and then I promise we will get to the doc really soon, but just do you mind sharing a little bit about what it was like losing him at that time, and what words of hope you would have for other people who have recently lost someone to hemophilia?
I don't know if this will be interesting or not, but you can determine it. You can determine in the edit. I had a college teacher. I went to school for acting at Boston University, and we had a class, Alexander Technique, that was in summary about centering. And it was our last class of senior year, as we were doing all of our last classes and last shows, and we had done showcases, and people had agents and summer stock stuff lined up, all the it's coming to an end, exciting launching things. And it was April 11th, 2007. And I just got a phone call immediately after my last Alexander Technique class. It was the instructor's birthday yesterday, so this is very top of mind too, because she remembers this vividly as well. And I always think about that too. I got this news and I was in such a centered, grounded, place, processing some real stuff. And then I got the most devastating news of my life. And I've said to people, that's the moment I understood Greek tragedy. That's the moment I understood what wailing meant. I understood why bagpipes are played at funerals. It just was this I was stripped of something that day. And he was a teammate for me too, because we both had this disease, and our parents split when we were really young, and that was a messy situation our whole life. But we were in it together. We had this camp that was an awesome place for kids that had various life-threatening and chronic illnesses, and it was such a great place to meet people who either had hemophilia or sickle cell disease or cerebral palsy, but everybody had something, and it became such a home for us. And so it wasn't just losing my brother, it was losing my teammate on all of these things, just as I was supposed to be launching into this really exciting future as a young professional. And for me, it felt like hemophilia held me back from a lot of stuff growing up. And athletics, I'm a very competitive person, in athletics in particular. Like I was never able to go out and be with friends and play in the way that I wanted to. And as an adult, I've realized that I've harbored anger from that, that I've needed to just kind of come to terms with and work through. And acting gave me this opportunity to kind of put all that energy into something that also provided me with teammates and an arena, albeit a different kind, and we're all moving toward a shared goal, and it's happening live, and it's exciting, and we're working together, and we have a plan, but it's always changing. It had so many elements. You got to wear costumes. It had so many elements of sports and the basketball teams I couldn't be on, that I loved it. And here I was about to get into the launching pad for the professional moment. I've conquered hemophilia. I'm now going to step into this world of entertainment, and then Adam's gone. And it was devastating. And for about a year, I was able to ride on momentum. I had enough things kind of lined up and going, and there's enough excitement and friends all moving to play. There's enough momentum. But that eventually gives way. And
Right.
when it gave way, that's when it really started impacting me about a year later.
Yeah, I resonate with what you're saying about the momentum, and I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that's such an interesting point that, right, life keeps going and there's like new this and new that. No matter what place you're at in life, I feel like that could be relatable depending on people's grief experiences, which are of course so unique and specific. But then at some point for everyone, there's that time where it really sinks in.
And thank God the world keeps turning too, right? Like, thank God, because eventually that's the thing that, for me anyway, with losing my brother, we were raised by my mom and grandma. We lost my grandma 3 months before him. There's been other loss. So like loss is something I've had to think a lot about and deal with. And often reality has been the thing I've been able to come back to, and for me, that's most evident in my work. I've put my energy and my focus into the work, but at the end of the day, as my family has said for a long time, life is for the living. So you do have to come back to reality, and thank God it's there for us.
So true. I'm so excited to have you because you're so well spoken. Like you have all these like inspirational little nuggets. So thank you for those.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. I think this stuff is really interesting, and sometimes you have to come on a podcast with someone you don't get to even see that often or talk to that much to like structure a way to be intimate, which is crazy, but I'm appreciative of that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. And okay, I just had a moment. Did you say April 7th, 2007, and you were in theater school? You were in your class. Is that what you said?
April 11th, 2007, I was in my class in
Okay.
theater school.
Okay. Well, it's in my grief training, they say it's like total danger zone. Definitely don't compare stories. So I'm definitely not trying to do that. But I just, such a different story. But my dad died on April 7th, and I was also in my theater school. So that's just interesting. I don't know what that means, but.
Well, we could probably go down this path alone for quite a while. I think theater school is a real interesting place for me to be, going through these losses. And I had experiences both losing with my grandmother and my brother. I was in a play about losing your mom when I lost my grandmother, who, for all intents and purposes, archetypally was my mom. And then I lost my brother, and less than a year later, I'm in a play that's touring about two brothers who were abandoned by their parents and only had each other until one abandoned the other. So it's like life and art and theater have had a real weird way of intersecting for me, and I'm ultimately grateful for it. So I think we could probably go on at length about that alone, but I don't know how interesting that would be.
No, yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. And that you were in that specific play about loss. That's just interesting to me that we were both in theater school. Like specifically, I was performing in a play, and I had to like stop the play because I got the call, and you were in theater school, and it was April 7th and April 11th. I don't know. That's just something that's interesting.
Wow. So you were on stage performing and things were stopped because the call came in?
Yeah, and my professor was so sweet. He knew, like the director, he knew that it was gonna kind of be any day, so he let me like bring my phone in my pocket. Looking back, I'm like, that was weird for the poor audience, but also, yeah. So it just started vibrating, and I was like, then I just knew, and but yeah, that's another story. But I feel connected to you that you were in theater school when you found out. I don't know why, but I feel. Again, totally different situations. So a question that I normally ask at the beginning is about your goldfish moment. And I'm curious what comes to mind. A goldfish moment is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death. For some people, it was their goldfish.
Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
Curious if anything specific comes to mind. And
yeah, I mean, this certainly isn't the first time I thought about death, but this is one of the most memorable ones, and very specific. Summer of 2006, I was a camp counselor for the first time at the summer camp I had previously gone to for the 12 years prior. And it was in between one of the sessions, and that was a really magical time at the campgrounds in that first year of transition because I'd only ever been there in this magical place. I was only ever there 6 days a year. It was only a week-long camp, so it had this place in my mind. Now I'm there 3 months, and I'm there during all these quiet moments. And that was my first year. That was a really interesting time. And in one of those, I was reading something Paul Newman found at the camp, and there was like a Time magazine with his face on it. It's like the 50 greatest Hollywood something. I was like, I'm going to look at this. And on one of the pages was James Dean. And I'd heard of James Dean before. Didn't really know much about him. Knew that he died young, was an actor. And there was a line in there about a tribute for the great work he had done and all the great films that he would go on to act in and direct. And I thought it struck me for a few reasons. One, he was not only getting credit for what he had accomplished in his few years of professional work that he had, but he was getting credit for things he had not yet accomplished. And he was an actor, and he was also getting credit for the things he had not yet accomplished as a director. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of credit for potential. And when you're young, you get a lot of credit when you go for the potential that you had. And there's like a blessing to that because you never have to fight for it or go after it in any significant way. You get the credit for maybe. And less than a year later, my brother dies at 18. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know why that summer, that day, that thing, that line stuck, but it did. And it got me thinking about death and like life as potential. And so long as there's life, there's potential. But once it's gone, there's not. And if you lose it early, you get credit for what was left on the table. And as we've found out these days, if you live too long, you might have to pay for what you've done earlier, later in your life. So just, I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no,
that's for me a goldfish moment.
No, it's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious about so much. So just statistically, more people who I've had on the podcast have lost a parent as opposed to a sibling so far, which I realize is due to the fact that parents are just older. So as you get older, there's more likelihood of X, Y, or Z. So I really want to, acknowledge the sibling relationship is very different and very specific. And I'm curious how it's been for you connecting with other people who have lost a sibling as you've gotten older, if you've encountered that, and what advice you would have for someone who has recently lost specifically a sibling.
Yeah, I have. It's been enough time now, and I've talked about it enough at enough events that people have approached me quite a bit, and I find it helpful, and people are very respectful generally, and don't want to overstep, but it helps me feel connected when other people I don't even need the story. If they just, sometimes they just want to say like, I lost my sister, and we just like look at each other and hug, and like that's maybe it. That's all it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of advice, like I said earlier, I had momentum for about a year after my brother's death, and after that, I fought to keep it going. I fought to keep the activity going, and I became a hamster on a wheel, and eventually that burns out. And I feel like in some ways I've been like, in the cartoon, if the car's driving away real fast, something falls off and it hits the ground, and it's like doink, 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 da, 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 da. And I feel like in some ways the grieving process for me has kind of gone that way, because I tried to run from it. I tried to run toward other things, and I put my energy into really good things, but that's not necessarily addressing the grief. And I don't think it wasn't really until the last probably 5 years that I have faced that truly, that there was like, oh, you actually have a significant amount of work to do, even though time has passed, because you have not been dealing with this part of it as much as you need to. So my advice would be to try to stay in the quiet and stay in the discomfort, and as best as possible, feel what you have to feel, find the support, find community, find people who have also experienced that. And there's a bunch of ways you can do that. But feel your feelings and allow it to happen, because the running, there is no outrunning it. There is no outrunning it.
Mm-hmm. How does addressing your grief as an adult look for you?
Ooh. How does addressing grief as an adult look for me? Well, I'm in regular therapy and have been for the last, this go-around for the last 3 years, consistently, weekly, at least. And that's been really helpful, because I've, talk about momentum in a good way. Like that's allowed me to really make some discoveries and build on them, and continually kind of explore the way that grief has impacted other parts of my life. That's been really interesting to me as an adult, how much I've avoided intimacy as a result of grief and abandonment, and wanting to control circumstances. So, it's interesting. This year, you mentioned in the introduction, having a baby. My wife Natalie is pregnant and 13 weeks today. It's pretty exciting.
Very exciting. Congratulations again.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a before after moment, to be sure. Hearing that heartbeat and seeing it on the screen, it's like, okay, yeah, okie dokie, that's life there. So I'm thinking about. I was actually thinking like I'm really leaving that young adulthood place. Cruising into 35. It's like, you're just like an adult. You're just a regular adult. We need some of them. You have to have adults, and you can have old people, and you can have young adults and kids. But we do need some adults, and you are now a part of that category. You have to accept it. I think I dealt with grief as a young adult by, in part, trying to run away from it, and then trying to put the negative impact that it had on me, like try to turn that energy into good. And that's great. But again, it's left holes. And I think in the last 5 years, work's been interesting, and professional stuff's good, but there's some holes on the personal side and in that ability to build intimacy. And it's something that is my, wife and I, when we first were dating and then engaged, and even into our marriage, discovering the intimacies that you can kind of deepen when there's like a little more space, a little more letting go, and being okay, and realizing that brings more space for me to allow newness into my life, which is literally occurring. We are literally growing a human to bring in. So how much space can I allow my grief to maintain? But that's hard, because grief also keeps me connected to my brother. It's that process started the day I lost him. It started in that moment of going Greek, And 14 years later, am I really letting it go? But like the last couple of years, I've been thinking about that a lot. It's like I'm holding on to something that I can do the work that he's inspired, and I can separate that out. I mean, that's not been easy, but I kind of work very actively to do that. But on a deeper personal level, like I'm ready for. I think I was ready for where I am, frankly, right now, which is to invite life in and keep moving forward.
I love that. It's very well put. And it's fascinating that you mentioned sort of like this moving on. And it's interesting. I find that grief does have moments of moving on and then showing up. And it's just this constantly evolving process, I think, for every human in their own way. But I find it interesting that it is an ongoing thing. And it does get easier, but it doesn't go away, and how one handles that. Or I don't want to say it gets easier. Maybe for some people it doesn't, but it just, it changes with seasons and with time. Have you found
totally, that? It's absolutely. It's a non-linear experience, and then entering different phases of life, there's like new triggers. People keep preparing me, like, my relationship to my father's fraught. And has been my whole life, and people keep reminding me, like, you've kind of have come to some peace with that, but there might be some new feelings when you're a dad, and there might be some new feelings about your mom and her as a parent when she's a grandparent. And so it's like, oh, okay, and I'm sure that's going to bring up stuff that I was like, didn't I deal with you? Isn't that but that's just not how it works. When I say letting go, it's kind of letting go of like the active part of grief, and it's not going to leave. It's impossible, and that is why it's okay to actively let go. I'm saying this for my own benefit, because it's impossible. It's impossible. So yeah, being okay when things do flare up, being okay, like you're not weak. It's not a failure of some kind. It's not a regression. There is no regression in grief, I believe. It's a non-linear process, and it's very individual. There are stages, and there's certain things we do know, but it is so specific to the individual and the circumstances that there really is no right or wrong, so long as you're moving toward healing. I think maybe is maybe the best way I could think to give grief direction.
Mm-hmm. And when you know that you're not crumbling all day, every single day, right? The goal is to get to a place. Yes. Well, that's another story, but the goal is to get to a place
that has its place too.
Yeah. Like if you can crumble, like, and have like that breakdown a few times a year as opposed to a few times a day. Hey, progress.
Absolutely.
I wonder if you care to share about how grief may have shown up for you during your wife's first pregnancy. Is that something that you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll share it if you want. It's a different grief. It's not my brother.
Right.
So yeah. When I was 21, my brother died, as we talked about, and I found out about 8 months later that my girlfriend at the time was 7 months pregnant, and that the unborn child had holoprosencephaly and was given a 0.0 chance of survival. And I found this out in the course of a 1-minute phone call. In addition, that my girlfriend and her mom would be traveling to the only third-term abortion clinic in the United States at the time, which was in Kansas. She was in Chicago. I was in New York. And then I didn't need to be involved. We were still together, and she was saying that, as she has recounted since, in part to try to protect me, knowing that, Gran, Adam, this. But I wanted very much to be a part of that process with her, so I was. And we can certainly talk more about that, but to speak more directly to the question about how that's come up in this pregnancy, we had a couple of false alarms this year too, and we had one moment of where we're pregnant, yay! And then realizing a couple days later, like, oh no, we're not pregnant. And then she also had a chemical pregnancy, a non-viable pregnancy, earlier this year as well. So that was like, okay, it's early, and it did not. It was a non-viable pregnancy. It was a miscarriage. So I've been a bit guarded, to be honest. These have been, it's been like incremental, my sort of letting this sink in as part of my reality, that this is actually happening. As I said earlier, the heartbeat moment, that's a moment. And then she's had some, she's okay, but there have been some bumps in the pregnancy. So we've had a number of sonograms for 13 weeks. We've like had more than you usually have. But because of that, I've also gotten to see these stages of growth, and that's been really cool. I've been actually, as I'm sitting here talking to you about that, I haven't had a chance to kind of process this. I did anticipate a little bit that it would be coming up, the grief in particular of that first experience. And maybe it will. In fact, I expect that it will. I'm a little surprised it hasn't yet, I suppose, but maybe that's because I am anticipating it. So it's going to lie dormant until my guard is down, because I don't get to control everything.
Well, thank you for sharing that too. It is. Yeah, it's a whole other podcast episode, right? Talking about
it's a thing. But it's important too for men to be able to talk about things like miscarriages, abortions. It's really important. So I've been reluctant for a number of reasons to talk about some of this stuff in the last decade, but I'm tired of that, and it's just too important. Guys got to talk more, and I'm one of them. So here we are, Chelsea. Here we are.
Yes, here we are. Here we are indeed, and yeah, it's really cool. I really appreciate the way that you do articulate your feelings. It's really incredible, and it's helpful, and it's like you're saying, it's so important that men can have people like you to listen to and hopefully inspire them to feel more X, Y, or Z, no right or wrong about their own experiences. So basically, you're amazing, and I'm going to keep complimenting you.
Well, you're very kind.
I said wife, so apologies, girlfriend. I incorrectly stated the details. So,
my wife. So yeah, I'm married to Natalie, my wife now. But the experience I was referring to is my girlfriend, a girlfriend at the time.
Right.
And actually, I did see her for the first time in several years, just before the quarantine. Actually, she's my last trip before this new world we live in. I was passing through. She lives in New York, and I kind of wanted to reach out for a while. Like that's something that had come up in therapy and in conversations with my wife about family planning. And I'd wanted to at numerous times over the past years and hadn't, and always felt like to reach out would be intrusive, and but if she's doing well, like I don't want to be like, hey, I want to connect, and and so I never did. And Natalie, my wife, was sort of like, that's a little silly, like if she's in a place where, and if she is in a place where she can't, like she's an adult with agency, and she can politely, respectfully, like redirect the conversation or something, but you have every right to like want to have that conversation,
right?
And have no specific reason to think it would not be welcomed. So yeah, it was interesting. The fates lined up, and we were able to have a nice like conversation and talk through some stuff and just catch up in a way that has probably also had an impact that I haven't really thought actively about in the last 13 weeks.
Wow. That's good for you, and for like listening to the intuition of what you felt like might be helpful and following through. So commendable. And
sharing it. I shared it with my wife, and it was her urging. Ultimately, that's an important part of it is, recognizing that thing inside, but then making sure, like, make it real, tell somebody else about it, help them navigate, even if you don't know what it is, just like, hey man, would you just, I don't know if this is crazy or whatever. Just could you hear this out for a minute? What friend is gonna, yes, of course. So just make sure you make it real.
Right. I love that. So thank you for making, real is definitely a word that comes to mind when I think of you and what you do. You are so real. Realness like radiates from everything that you say and that you do. So let's discuss, not awkward pivot of the conversation, but you run this incredible company. You do presentations around the United States and world. There's resources, there's connecting hemophilia families, there's a web series, now there's a documentary, there's a podcast, and it all came from your brain at some point. It's very impressive. How did you, I don't like to say how do you do it all, but could you talk about how your idea came to life and how that's led you to your documentary today?
If I had one sentence to do it with, I would say that reality is the best asset. So as reality has presented me with opportunities, either by way of a partnership or a project or a budget or an opportunity to travel somewhere to do something, as reality has presented opportunity, using my brain to be like, okay, what's here? Like, what could this be? At each stage is the short story of how it's happened. More tangibly, the very first person who I spoke to, and I had this concept, it was the web series that you're referencing, Stop the Bleeding, that launched our company. Now in its 10th season, which is ridiculous. And it was this filmmaker who I'd worked with on set for something real silly, some like silly little job. But he was great. And I really liked him and the way he was with his crew. I knew nothing about cameras. I went to theater school. And so I just kind of noted that and then kept an eye on stuff he was doing, saw the edit of the thing we did, and was like, okay, this guy's something. And so when I had this idea, I sat down with him first and thought, I've seen what you can do, and I know what I can do, and I have this concept, and I don't know how to support it financially, but if you see this, then I'll go figure that part out. And that is what happened. He saw it, and I got to work figuring out how things for families affected by hemophilia came to be funded within the hemophilia and healthcare world, and then did everything I could to push the use of entertainment as an engagement tool, because a part of what caused my brother's death was he wasn't engaged with his disease, and he didn't develop the habits he needed to keep himself protected. And he paid the ultimate price, but a lot of people pay a much more mild price over time, which is that they're just having bleeding episodes and doing irreversible damage that doesn't need to be if they're staying accountable to the medications that are available. So we know young people, adolescents into young adulthood, people drop off from adherence to regimens. They don't go to the doctors, all kinds of stuff. And I would say my brother's an example of, he wasn't well enough connected. So I wanted to use entertainment as a way to bring more people, especially young people, in, and not always being so education. Yes, education is important, but you can't just like throw education at someone and then they're educated and you can go education, check a box. The person, like the teacher appears when the student is ready, right? We've been saying that for a long time. So I feel like you got to lead with entertainment. And if you're good at that, then you'll have them engaged. And once they're engaged, you can Trojan horse, sneak in a little bit of education, and they'll then walk away and be like, that was fun. Yeah, that was good. That was a cool thing that we learned. And look at you. You soft snuck some education in there. Good for you. And I've pushed that very hard because I believe firmly in it. And so that's how all of these different podcasts, musical theater program, documentary about a mountain climber, that's why they're all sort of, because anytime there's been an opportunity to use entertainment and story and people's actual stories to kind of drive messaging and drive engagement around critical messaging, I've really worked to figure out how entertainment could be the way to get there. And we've done a good job, and I've built a nice team of people whose who were excited to figure that out each time we were presented with, hey guys, we are now making a graphic novel. And it's like, oh, cool. All right. And graphic novel time. It's like a coffee table book. Look, I know podcast, maybe will be a picture. You can't see this on a podcast, but I'm showing Chelsea right now this thick coffee table book that we made in conjunction with the documentary. We had never made a coffee table book before, but we've taken advantage of the opportunities that have presented themselves, and that has just led to one crazy project after another.
This is amazing. And I'm just so drawn to what you're saying. Like the way that you talk about it is so magnetic. And I swear to God, we are getting to the documentary, but I swear, like you're saying, I feel like
I'm not trying to force it. I feel like you're being accountable to me. I'm not trying to force it, but I keep bringing things to that. It's just so top of mind. I'm probably referencing it in a way that feels like, all right, we know, buddy. We know. You got a documentary. We'll get to it.
No, it's amazing. I just feel like we're painting this like wonderful context. Kind of what you're saying. It's like we're drawing the people in. But Can you articulate the different pillars of your company? Because I want you to have a moment of humble bragging here, just so people can understand all of the different facets of this company. You know, you have multiple people that work for you and have had that since you were quite young, and you have so many fascinating nationwide and worldwide programs. I mean, it's incredibly interesting. And I would love for if you could just spell out some of these activities and tools and pillars for others listening so they can understand the company.
Yeah. So, I mean, at its core, we have kind of two big departments. We have our content agency, and then we have our film production company. And increasingly, you know, we launched a podcast network. And I think when we first launched it, really it was more a brand than a network. And we have worked ourselves into a network, and that's really kind of its own thing, though it gets lumped into the agency bucket. I'm going to break it out. Congratulations. Today you graduated to bucket 3. So we have our podcast operation, our content agency, and then our film production company. The work that we do and the work that has driven our abilities in entertainment, in the entertainment piece, has been in this content agency. And it has enabled us to create programming that goes to conferences around the country and sometimes around the world. It's enabled us to go around the world to film life with hemophilia and ways in which it's being treated and managed in different healthcare systems, and the way that people's donations of medicine and money are being used abroad. So we've been part of a number of trips to all around the world. We have filmed on all 7 continents.
Wow.
And we've been in, 20 or 30 something countries in the last 7 or 8 years. And it's all been for that kind of work. And then, we started the podcast. The podcast was a kind of a threshold moment for us, because we had the web series was a real pillar. We had this live event series that became this second pillar. And I was like, okay, now we have 2 firm programs, 2 firm brands, different needs, different niches. And then when we got the podcast going, it was a little bit early in the we're in a podcast boom right now. So it might seem a little more obvious, but at the time it really opened a door for us and enabled us. It kind of gave us another way to reach people, and thereby another way to bring in revenue for those interested in reaching people through the content that we could create in the podcast network. So that kind of opened up this whole other opportunity. The film production company, that's not regularly bringing in, historically that hasn't regularly brought in money. Each film has kind of had its own LLC and fundraising mechanism, and in that way, Believe Limited it's more of like an umbrella for all of these film properties. But we are more and more developing our own work. In fact, we have a development project with Jersey Films, which is run by Danny DeVito and his family. So we have a cool development project going there. We've got a couple of TV development projects that are in various stages of life. And we've got film at this point, we've got film scripts, and we're not hurting for scripts. We're hurting for the time and resources to make them happen. So that's kind of the three big pillars, and the agency is what has really driven our revenue, but then our ability to leverage our film production company so that we could create the best content possible, and the ability to leverage the podcasting network so that the messaging that the content is driving could be reiterated through this podcast network and kind of reinforced through this network. It's enabled us to kind of then use the content agency to put our resources back into film production and into podcasting and hiring more people to support the growth of both of those. So yeah, I don't know if that was probably really incomprehensible, but there's three big pillars. There's our content agency, the film production company, and the podcast operation. Maybe I should have just stuck with that.
No, this is so interesting. It is so interesting, and it's inspiring. If there's someone else out there who, has these dreams, it's just like a reminder of what's possible. Hey, not saying it's easy. I'm sure there was a tremendous amount of work, and I think it's amazing. Well, and it's a reminder of what's possible. I guess that's what comes up for me.
I appreciate that. And, success, we determine, each of us, what that means for us. People don't get to determine that for you. And that's a hard thing to remember. But I a few years ago, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm successful. By what that means for me, I am successful. But I'm still finding that I've got a fair amount of stress, a fair amount of anxiety, and a way increased workload of responsibilities. It turns out success is a thing to be managed. I always thought of it as a destination. I'm going to work hard and then I'm going to be successful. And then you just walk around like, I'm successful, walking around. But actually you have to keep that going. And then every time we grow, it's wonderful, but it also adds pressure. It adds payroll. It adds overhead. It adds a need to figure out ways to continually keep it going. So success is not a stale, passive thing. It's highly active, and it takes a lot of energy. But I'm now at a point that, there's a bunch of people that work for the company, and we touch a lot of lives, and that's amazing. So when the management sometimes gets to be overwhelming, to step back and realize, wow, each of these incremental steps, program by program, partnership and new hire and client and key participant after key participant, all that, here we are, and we've built this incredible thing that's doing a lot of good. How do we keep that going? We've got something really, really special, and the people who work for the company feel that way too. And I'm excited to see where we're going to go, especially given the way I think healthcare is going to bob and weave a little bit, healthcare management, given this pandemic and what we're learning, telehealth and telemedicine, and the ability to control some time and costs and enable people a better quality of life, not having to necessarily travel 3 hours for a simple blood draw. If there's better coordination and a telehealth, connection to the primary doctor. I keep hearing from these hematologists, and there's a conference going on right now in the hemophilia world, and they keep talking about how telehealth has been a real godsend during the pandemic, and they don't see how we're going to go back to a time where we're not using it, maybe not this much, but with certainly an increased output from where we were prior to the pandemic. So I'm very curious to see what the kind of work we do around building community, building up young people, helping them find ways to find their voice and develop who they are as responsible patients and self-advocates and dreamers. So hemophilia and any kind of chronic disease or rare disease can really stifle a young person's ability to dream. And that's unfortunate because I think as my friend Chris the Mountaineer has proven, someone with hemophilia is capable of doing pretty great things.
Yes. So let's talk about this Chris the Mountaineer. I almost said this Chris character as if he's not your friend and the star of the doc. But let's talk about this incredible documentary where your friend with hemophilia does these amazing things that most people will never do in their lifetime. Can you talk about what it was like conceptualizing, shooting this? Tell us everything we need to know, because I think it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Thank you. So it's called Bombardier Blood. Chris Bombardier is the climber. Bombardier Blood is a little double entendre. But it's been a 5-year journey or so, and it was very cool. We've gotten so close. I actually had a great conversation with him today, a personal catch up, and it had been a minute because we work together so much and sometimes like don't leave space to like still be friends. So
Right.
We had to carve that time into today. But we didn't start as friends. He was the mountaineer with hemophilia, and people knew me as actor, filmmaker, content guy with hemophilia. We were at a dinner together once and introduced but didn't talk. And then at one of these conferences, like the one going on now, when it was a live thing several years ago, he was like, "Can I sit down for lunch and chat with you about something?" And I was like, "Sure." And this happens often enough, right? People want to like pick my brain about something or pitch a product or whatever. But he was like, I'm trying to climb the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each continent. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I know you're climbing. I didn't realize okay. That's like a big thing. It sounds like." It's like, yeah. And I'm trying to raise money and awareness for this organization, Save One Life, that does all this work around the world to help people with hemophilia in poverty. Most people with severe hemophilia around the world die by age 10. 75% of the world does not have sustainable access to the medicine that keeps people like me managed, who otherwise statistically that would have been my odds. So Chris, as a person with severe hemophilia, super well managed, is climbing these mountains and then trying to raise money, because many of these mountains exist in countries that don't have systems to support people with hemophilia. So it's kind of a little So he thought, this is kind of interesting, and I want to show people both what is and is not possible when you have hemophilia, depending upon that access to care and health. I've climbed 5 of the 7. People have not been paying a ton of attention, but Everest is coming up, and everybody knows Everest. And I think maybe if we tried to work on something, we could use Everest to create a film or a series or something that would communicate that message and capture the climb. It will be the first time someone with hemophilia gets to the top of the world, which is where the summit of Mount Everest is. I'd like to take credit for that idea. It's a really good idea, but it was his idea, and I will take credit for listening to him. And then when I asked him, what really had me, though, to be honest with you, was once the concept, I was like, yeah, got it. I'm 100% with you. We got to talk timeline and like budget. Do you have any, I imagine Everest is expensive alone. Making a film is almost impossible. Do you have any idea? And he was like, no, and it's been really hard so far, and Everest is the most expensive. And I was like, fantastic. He was being very honest, though, and it wasn't in a trite way, but he was just very frank. He didn't pretend that, like, he could help with that. He didn't pretend. He didn't have a bravado. There was just something in how, I think there was a vulnerability in him in that moment that I was like, okay, who knows if we're going to be able to do this, but I'll go down the road with this guy. And then it just takes one. And we were able to find the one right person to appeal to enable us to make this happen. And they did. In terms of like what the process of it was insane. We had very little time. We made the most of it that we could. We could only have one person with Chris on the mountain for the 2 months that you spend on Mount Everest when you are attempting to climb to the top.
Wow.
And during that time, I was also getting married. We had all this other client work going on. So like our team was just all over the world and spread in nuts for a good period of time working on the film. And then our editor was in Australia and in England, and we're in Los Angeles, and Chris is in Colorado. It was just like a constant coordination game. But then, you see a first cut, and you start to see it go from concept and, dailies and stuff in the can to a story that's building, and then you remember parts from that other interview that would go really well here in this thing that's emerging that's on faith. And okay, then the energy you find the next wave of energy that you need for that post-production process. That's been interesting. It's for us, Chris, he climbed in 2017, and then he climbed the final mountain in January 2018. And obviously now we're in the summer of 2020, so it's taken us a minute to get here. But the process in large part has been, we've been able to keep going because of the model that we have, frankly. We were able to self-support so much of our post-production work because we had an agency that was bringing in resources. And if we hadn't had that, would we have been able to kind of manage the film and this complicated workflow for 2 years and get all the elements in place to be, we have screened this film at over 200 different patient organizations and community centers around the world at this point.
You have? Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's been all over the place. It's been doing great things, and that's what's all been leading up to now, it coming into the world. That was kind of our equivalent to a festival run, was bringing it to hemophilia events and schools, community centers, churches, people who kind of connected with the message of the film, hospitals. We tried to get really creative and found a lot of cool audiences, and now it goes to the big audience. And August 18th, it'll be available everywhere. We keep driving people to iTunes because for a bunch of silly reasons, but I'm happy if people want to watch it wherever they want to watch it. Bombardier Blood will be in a lot of places on August 18th.
People can pre-order it before that. Is that correct?
They can, yes. Thank you. It's available for pre-order on iTunes as of now. So between now and the 18th, and then it'll be on iTunes as well as Fandango now and Amazon and other places come the 18th.
How long is the documentary?
84 minutes, I think. It says it when you pull the page up, too. I should know that. It's about 84 minutes.
No, I was just curious. I don't know. That sounds like the perfect length, honestly.
Yes.
That sounds
it's good.
Lovely. And
it's a good length.
That is just really, really inspiring, down to that first moment when this guy approached you and it was just an idea and you were able to work together, fund, shoot, and show that someone with hemophilia can overcome these insurmountable odds. Did you find it joyous to hear reactions? Were you at some of the screenings? Did any young people have any profound thoughts? I'm sure they did. I'm just curious if any stories come to mind.
Yeah, yes, I've been to many. I think what's most exciting is to see the way, when I'm with Chris, to see the way that kids and parents respond to him, and the clear just hope that he provides for everyone. He's so genuine. I mean, he's just such an excellent person. He's if you could literally cast the kind of person you would want to have this moment where a global community would be rallying around him and drawing hope. I mean, it put a ton of pressure on him as the documentary gets into, but you really couldn't ask for someone better. So that's what's been most rewarding. What actually kind of comes to mind, though, as I sit with the question a moment, is when filmmakers and storytellers have kind of emerged. When I have been at healthcare events, and then there's a question in the audience about our decision about a certain way we told a part of the story, or a question about how we, were able to keep the cameras warm enough at base camp. And that's kind of interesting to me because when I hear the curiosity in that, and when I was a kid, I didn't dream of trying to make films. I didn't know that was really a thing you could do. But I see in these kids, they believe in themselves, and they have these curiosities, and I'm in a place to encourage those curiosities, which is really exciting. And then, there's there's random messages. There's a lot of Facebook messages that I get from people who are I saw it last night at my Indianapolis hemophilia event, and I haven't felt this way in a long time. And people have just been so surprised. They are not used to, at these kind of events, this sounds sort of, I don't know, I don't know what this sounds like, but they're not used to having some legitimate documentary about their community and this monumental moment, but told from this really broad global perspective. So it's just sort of overwhelming for some people. And then there's some history in the film that is tough. There's some tough, I mentioned it earlier. There's some tough history in the hemophilia world, and we don't shy away from that. We don't dwell on it because that's not what the story is, but it is a part of it. So it brings stuff up for people, and anytime they reach out, I'm just grateful too. I'm just grateful. The connections that people can make to the work is really the purpose. It's sometimes terrifying. And man, when I've been in places where like there's some technical issues, it's good to get me out of the room if possible, because that's always the toughest. But it's any opportunity to connect people to the material is like that's why we do it. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. It's so inspiring that you are able to, like you're saying, bring this legitimate piece of art, this documentary with young people who are relatable. Like, I feel like when you think health conference, sometimes you think rooms and spaces that are stuffier or led by older people or professional people that are doctors and maybe not.
Like that's usually what you think of, if we're being honest, right? Like that's kind of what comes to mind, generally speaking.
Yeah, people that aren't necessarily like as able to connect. But I was so blown away at the conference space in St. Louis that I was lucky enough to be at. That was several years ago, but just the way that families rallied around you and the panel and how receptive they were to this incredible event that you put on that is educating people about hemophilia in a way that's accessible and relatable and like charismatic. It's really, really, really fascinating and something to be so proud of. I think it's like, I mean, and you've won so many awards, which I will talk about at the beginning in your bio and list.
God.
So I'm glad you are recognized.
Ugh, no, don't. Don't do all that. People don't care about all that crap.
I thought of something that I actually wanted to address that I could have asked you earlier, but while we're here, could you speak to hemophilia's day-to-day effects? I think a lot of people may not know what it is. And could you talk about what happens when you bleed and the precautions that one takes not to bleed, and just more about the disorder so that people can understand how amazing it is that he did climb these summits and just learn more about what you're going through?
Yeah, so day-to-day life with hemophilia, if you don't have medication, then generally speaking, the blood vessels that are bursting and then not healing, they're in the places in your body that are under the most stress. So that tends to be our joints, and more specifically, our weight-bearing joints. So if you see older people with hemophilia or people from countries that don't have regular access to medicine, you'll often see people who have really enlarged knees and misshapen knees, a pretty affected gait. Hips might be off because of the knees, the ankles. Sometimes my ankles actually have partially self-fused, both of them, due to bleeding episodes, because the blood is not meant to be outside the veins. It's actually kind of interesting. Blood's quite corrosive outside the veins. It breaks down tissue and bone and ligament and tendon. So it's kind of, the bleeding episode is bad and painful. But actually what sticks around is all of that damage that gets done by the blood once it's escaped the blood vessel. So now if you're taking the medicine, are you immune from that? No, you're not. You still are susceptible to those kind of events happening from time to time. And the important thing is to know, okay, got to keep taking the meds. And the meds are taken intravenously, which is through an IV, so a butterfly needle. And the most people who are like me that are doing this 3-ish times a week, you're doing that from home, because going to a clinic or a hospital 3 times a week, I mean, many people have to do that. But obviously if you don't have to do that, great. And with hemophilia, you can be taught to self-infuse. So Chris, he does something similar. Now, we have different forms of hemophilia. I don't want to get too technical because the experience is not terribly different, but I'm missing, of those 13 proteins, I'm missing the 8th, he's missing the 9th, but the same sort of general stuff, joint bleeds. And he actually experiences more muscle bleeds, interestingly enough. And there's a lot of kind of mystery. Well, I don't know if that's fair. There's a certain degree of mystery, that's certainly fair, about why some people are more susceptible to muscle bleeds and mucosal bleeds than bleeds in the joints. Chris happens to be a bleeds in the muscle kind of guy. But he too is infusing with an IV once a week, I think, or more often when he was on Everest, actually, as you'll see in the film. And he did indeed have to bring his medication up with him and mix and manage and self-infuse on the mountain, as he has done on every mountain that he has been on. But in addition, Everest has hazards that the other mountains don't have, so he had to be prepared for certain kind of situations that Aconcagua in South America didn't necessarily present, although that has its own stuff. And the training was different than any of his prior training. And he played college baseball, which in and of itself for someone with hemophilia is really impressive. But he did, through his baseball career, develop a little bit of what you'd consider a target muscle for bleeds. People with hemophilia tend to have one or two joints or muscles that are particularly problematic for them. Mine's my left ankle. For Chris, it's one of his quads. And a couple times in his training, that flared up and set him back. And of course, Everest, it's only open for a certain period of time in the year. It's only warm enough to summit to the top of Everest around like early May, late April. So that's why it's this 2-month period where you go up and you acclimate and you train from how to get to base camp all the way to 27,000 feet or 29,000 feet. But then you just wait for the right weather window to present itself, and then it's done until the next year. So he couldn't really afford injuries to set him back. And we found out so late in the game that we were even going to have the funding and ability to do all this, that he had been training, but it was like, okay, we got to really ramp up now because it's real. So that was as tough as the actual managing of it on the mountain, I'd say. He did great. He did really, really great, but it was not without a ton of preparation.
Wow. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's so fascinating. And I wanted to back up just a second when you mentioned the fact that he played college baseball is in and of itself a huge feat. And I just wanted to clarify that is because, if I'm correct, a person with hemophilia needs to take preventative measures or at least precaution around the potential to bleed.
Oh, yeah.
The main thing is you don't want to get an external cut or bleed. Is that correct?
It's actually more internal cuts, surface level cuts anyway.
Okay.
The platelets, the clotting system is intricate, but there's more platelet activity involved in that. Whereas the proteins you're missing in hemophilia are more relevant to when blood vessels burst. So it's internal bleeding and bruising and swollen joints and muscles and stuff like that you're more prone to see and that you have to worry about. So yeah, I mean, to have a guy playing college baseball, is like pretty incredible. You're putting a lot of pressure on your body and on your joints. He was taking this medication weekly to manage himself, but nonetheless, still putting himself through a ton of pressure. What was kind of cool though, he's from Colorado, and there's such an outdoor spirit in Colorado. And when I met his doctors and clinicians for the film, I was at first surprised by how used to adapting to their patients' lifestyles they were, because everyone in Colorado like either snowboards or skis or goes hiking, and it's just what you do. So they haven't like philosophically tried to dissuade people from those kinds of things because they have hemophilia. They have worked with people to create the right plan that would enable them to do those things safely and responsibly. And they did that with Chris all through his youth and young adulthood playing baseball. And it was baseball that kept Chris adherent to his meds, which I mentioned earlier, my brother's lack of adherence, that played a huge role in his death. Chris, like all of us, has struggled at times to stay adherent, and he talks openly about like baseball was the thing, that it was that carrot at the end of the stick that kept him taking his meds and doing what he needed to do to stay healthy. And then when that went away, that was really hard on him. And, when he found mountaineering, it opened up this whole another phase of his life. But it was for a long time baseball that was keeping him healthy, which is also important too. Like when you have something like hemophilia, you think of physical activity, you don't necessarily want to be pushing it, but at the same time, I mean, you do want to be pushing it to a certain degree. You have to exercise and move your body. You don't want to be pushing stuff that's too much, I suppose. But at the same time, if that's the thing that keeps the person taking care of themselves so that they can keep going back to that thing they love, well, what is life about at the end of the day? So I was very appreciative of that when I met his clinicians, and it's very cool. It's a very cool point of view, and it's cool that there are medical professionals. And I've met many others who are like-minded, but that was a particularly eye-opening experience for me.
Wow, that's right. Just the Colorado world, they're like more, that makes sense that reaction would exist, but also it makes sense to not have necessarily pondered that would differ in the medical world depending on the geography. Do you mind me asking what it's like for females during menstruation, or if they're able to give birth?
Yeah, so heavy menstrual bleeding or menorrhagia, which is kind of a bit of an what's that word? Antiquated term, but heavy menstrual bleeding is kind of one of the big symptoms for women with bleeding disorders. Hemophilia tends to, so it's interesting actually. Most women, and if I have a daughter, this will be true for her because hemophilia is carried on the X chromosome. So most women, because they have two X's, they don't have symptoms of hemophilia. If they do, they tend to be mild. As I mentioned, that's not exclusively true, but that is the generality. So that doesn't generally present a problem, except when there is, we'll say, a major event such as giving birth or getting surgery, or if unfortunately someone's in an accident or something, then you are having low factor levels as a carrier of hemophilia become significant. You have enough to live life normally, but and that can sometimes be actually the dangerous thing, are people, women in particular, who do have low factor levels, but because that's not presenting until what I'm calling a major event, they can often not know that until they are giving birth or going through a surgery, and then there's some uncontrolled bleeding episode, and there's a lot of horror stories out there. So it's actually one of our missions with a small m, I'll say, the last few years has been trying to do more to raise awareness about the prevalence of bleeding disorders in women, because 90% are not diagnosed, and as many as 1% of the population has a bleeding disorder. I saw some terrible thing in the UK a few years ago about they had given tens of thousands of hysterectomies to women as a means of treating heavy menstrual bleeding. And these are women like age 18 and up. So some real young women making that choice / not being given a whole slew of options. They don't even do a screening for a bleeding disorder. It's not even considered that maybe the heavy menstrual bleeding is because they have a bleeding disorder. And before you take away the right to procreate forever, you might want to check that out, because there's a lot of medication available to manage it. It's but then you look at who's in charge, and it starts answering the questions. So yeah, I get a little soapboxy about it because it's super important. And in fact, I'm going to go a little harder. If you are listening to this and you are a woman who has prolonged periods, and like you've always been told that just runs in the family or whatever the case may be, but if that little thing in your gut is like, I wonder, there's a website called betteryouKnow.org, and it will help you look at like ways to look at symptoms, and ultimately, in my opinion, there's an ability to print a one sheet you bring to your doctor, and that I think is going to be most helpful. But just to start to get a gauge, it lists the common symptoms. There's so many women I have met or I've heard stories from who their abnormal experience had been so normalized that it was just never considered that there might be medication. It was never considered something to like bring up in a medical context, or there was like shame around it because it was, I'm bleeding so much so often, I'm going through so many pads in a day, and it's like, but fortunately that is changing. But as it's changing, all the stories are emerging, right? So that's why I'm very aware of it, because the stories are now coming out, and they're terrible. They're really, really bad, because there's such prejudices too, working against women in our healthcare system. That doesn't help anything either. And that's a whole, I got on too many soapboxes, Chelsea. It's really dangerous. It's really, really dangerous. I got a lot of soap.
It's it's magnetic. The world is dirty. Clean us up. Clean us up. How does one test for a bleeding disorder?
Yeah, you have to get a blood draw. So it's, of course, different depending on what exactly it is that you're testing for. And it's a good question you ask, because there are reasons for some of these unfortunate truths, such as 90% of people are not diagnosed. The testing for von Willebrand disease in particular, which is the most common bleeding disorder. So von Willebrand protein, it's just another protein like the factor proteins in hemophilia. They all just have these different names, but the way that molecule is set up, it's just a more difficult, it's just more difficult biologically to understand it. And then its behavior as a molecule can be very erratic. So like the thing I'm missing, it behaves in these like really basic ways, and that's it. You don't have to worry about complicated stuff. It's kind of simple. This other protein is really complicated. So it can be hard to get an accurate diagnosis, and then the way you express symptoms can change over the course of a person's life, and sometimes it's impacted by hormones, and sometimes it's impacted by we don't really know. And so many women get shuffled to one person after another and get misdiagnosed. And I think it's on average a study from, this is going back maybe 5 years now, but at the time anyway, on average, it took a woman 14 years from the time of a first identified symptom to a proper diagnosis. 14 years from an identified symptom.
Wow.
14 years. So we got a lot of work to do in that area. And, it's interesting to kind of be figuring out what is my role in that exactly. It's, I try not to overstep or get too zealous about other people's missions, but at the same time, it's one community, it's one humanity, we're one world,
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to gravitate toward where the needs are. So
I think it's incredible the work that you do, and that you are advocating for yourself, for other people, for women. We need your voice. We need people like you who have dedicated the majority of their life to bettering other people's lives. In and of itself is just the most commendable thing you can do. So I'm fascinated. You're just like magnetic, everything that you're saying, which I've known, having the privilege of speaking with you a few times before. And I could hear you talk all day. I'm so glad you're a speaker and doing what you do, because this is what you're meant to do. And an actor, and a podcaster, and a filmmaker, and all of the other wonderful things.
Too many things. And a dad soon. I got to make room for that one. And that's like apparently like way up on the list too. So I got to really figure some stuff out.
I heard it was like at the top or something.
I heard that too.
I don't know. Okay. Wow. Okay. I can't wait to follow more of your journey, Patrick. Is there anything else you would like listeners to know about hemophilia, or about what you are looking to accomplish in the future?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd say in terms of what I'm looking to accomplish in the future, I want to continue to see how entertainment can be used as a vehicle to affect change in the world. And I know there's a lot of film that's intended to make a difference and affect change, but I feel like there's still a lot of room to grow and a lot of ways to be more innovative about the stories we're telling and the way we're capturing stories, especially from a documentary perspective all around the world. And my whole life I've been interested in spoken word. I grew up on talk radio, sports talk radio. I'm interested in documentaries. I like real stories. I'm curious to see where that's going in my life, but I also really do miss narrative work, and I've not gotten to do as much of that in the last several years, to be honest. And I'm craving it, as are many of my colleagues. So kind of trying to figure out what does that mean? What do we have to kind of consider and pursue to keep ourselves fulfilled as artists in this way, and keep exploring what those opportunities to affect change through narrative work could be. So yeah, I'd say that's what I'm trying to spend my time doing. And if people want to keep up with what's going on in my world, Patrick James Lynch on Instagram, PJ Lynch on Twitter, and Bombardier Blood is the thing I'm going to be talking about nonstop for the next few weeks. So if you're inclined, I would implore you to pre-order Bombardier Blood, share it with people, tell people about it if it moves you. And it's a family-friendly movie too, which I think is kind of cool. You know, like we didn't set out to make a family-friendly movie, but as it turned out, because I had this community in mind, I kind of did. So that's become a cool thing to be able to say, like it's ultimately an inspiring and hopeful tale and a good family film.
I can't wait to see it, and I hope that anyone listening feels compelled to pre-order or order, depending on when they hear this, because, I mean, how could they not after hearing the wonderful words of Patrick James Lynch? I so appreciate you coming. I'm drawn to everything you say, and congratulations again on what you're accomplishing through all of the wonderful pillars that is your company, and that is you.
Well, you're so nice, and I want to applaud what you're doing here, and you're opening up conversations that are important, and you're kind of giving access to talk about stuff that isn't really easy to talk about, but obviously the listeners to this podcast like are proof. There's an audience for it. You know, there's a need to connect around it, and there's people like us who are interested in these kinds of conversations and ways of thinking. So kudos to you for creating that platform, and I am excited to see it continue to grow.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate you, and I think that sums it up.